See a countdown.
Oh, here we are. It is live Nonprofit Problem Solver podcast. This is episode 38, and I'm joined by Heather Wolfson. Our question today is, how do I lead into the next normal, which we'll get to in just a minute. Just wanted to say thank you to YAPME, the virtual event platform that we're using for the podcast. Always 100% free to nonprofits. So something to look into for your next event, certainly for its virtual capabilities. And also to PodPro Audio. Glenn is the producer of choice if you want professional podcasting. So, Heather, how are you?
Good. How are you, Kev?
All right. Well, is it sunny San Diego this fine morning?
See, everybody thinks it's always sunny and 72, but it's actually overcast and a little dreary today.
Right. Well, I can tell you're envious because I am like day 6 of consecutive sun here in the UK. So that doesn't often happen. So it is genuinely remarkable. So I am remarking upon it. In any case, tell us a little bit about your background and your experience in nonprofits and where people can find you online.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, Kev. I know we've been planning this for some time, so I'm so thrilled and honored to be here with you. I am Heather Wolfson. I'm currently the CEO and lead strategist of Maven Coaching and Consulting, a firm that I started in the last couple of years after nearly 20 years working primarily with nonprofits and senior level positions. I've been in nonprofit organizations that have been around for 100 plus years. And I even started an organization with a dear colleague of mine. So I've had many, many years in the nonprofit field and have always been fascinated by the people piece and leadership. And I encourage you all to follow me on Instagram at Heather_Wolfson, where I post a lot of musings and ideas and concepts that I've developed over the last several years. And wanted to share too with listeners and viewers that I'm going to be offering a free webinar on June 15th. I'm calling it Here I Am, Reset and Recharge for Summer and the Next Normal, which is what we're talking about today.
Yeah, that's excellent. And is that a, did you said that was a free webinar?
Free webinar.
And will there be a replay available?
I am working on how that's going to happen because it's going to be a very interactive webinar. So my hope is, but we'll see. I might just offer it again.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep mindful. And I notice on Instagram, because we do follow each other and comment on stuff, is your tag leadership strategist?
My tag is leadership strategist.
Right.
That's how I'm leading.
Right. Okay.
I'm not just a coach. I'm not just a consultant. I do my own kind of research and thinking, bring my own kind of techniques and theories and frameworks to the mix.
Right.
So a little bit of everything.
Well, I mean, that's in a sense the essence of leadership, isn't it? I mean, there's always in any bookshop, there's always this massive section in the business aisles. It seems, if there's any sort of business section, there's several shelves full of leadership texts. And you always sort of feel like the headlines are shouting at you to do this or to do that, as though there's one answer or some magic bullet, but it really just isn't like that. It's just it's a multifaceted, experiential type of thing. Leadership, isn't it?
First of all, I love all the books. I'm a book junkie, as you can see behind me, and that's only like maybe like 1/20th of the books that I have laying around my house that all have.
Meaning, I thought one of those said blueberry muffins. So I would anyway.
No, Blue Shift.
Those are leadership.
Blue Ocean Shift. But
yes.
Lots of leadership books. So I love to learn. But what I love to do is read them and then interpret for myself. Okay, what does this actually mean to me and my work? And how can I use a little bit of this to inform something that I'm doing, or put a couple of different ideas together? My big thing is understand it, then apply it. And we are growing, learning human beings, right? and we have lived
Ideally.
experiences. Hopefully,
Right.
hopefully,
Right.
we have all these lived experiences that then inform what we take away. And I always say it's like the best practice is when you're rolling up your sleeves and you're in it. And that's where I learned over the last 20 years in nonprofits.
Yeah, so that's interesting you say that, because when you say learn it then apply it, the first thought I had was that you often learn by applying it. There's a certain amount of intellectualizing and understanding the concept in order to get started, but really the learning surely is in its application,
In its application and watching people around you. I actually think some of the best learning are when people are doing it a way you don't like it, or role modeling in not the best ways, right? Because you can step back and say, wait, that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't seem right, and here's how I might do it differently. So yeah, we learn from being in it as well. But sometimes it's nice to, and this is where I go, is sometimes it's nice to have validation or a more deep understanding around where does this come from, right? Like, is this neuroscience? Is this psychology? Human development theories? So that's where my brain goes.
Yeah, there's so much around. I feel that there's so much around leadership, and I think we had this conversation we've mentioned in the past. We've spoken about it that the question of management as opposed to leadership. Management is somewhat neglected because it's leaders who are buying the books. So we write about leadership. But in all your reading, I just want to sort of pin you down a little bit before we jump into leading into the next normal, because we have to unpack what we mean by next normal. But I'm interested on your take on leadership, because I think it's such a big area, as we said, it's multifaceted. And I know that I use in my practice a couple of different angles at it depending on the context, and so I'm just interested in what you've sort of gleaned from your reading and where you're arriving at. If someone says to you, well, what is leadership, or how do I be a leader? So it's these sort of open, hard to, if not impossible to answer questions. What's your approach to that?
It's like the $1 million question, Kev, right? Because I feel like as I have more
so when you answer, you don't get $1 million. That's
no,
not for me anyway.
It would be nice, and then I would donate it maybe to a nonprofit. Nice. So what is leadership? I look at leadership very broadly. Some people just take leadership in the context of a workplace environment, but I actually think it goes much broader. There's leadership in your family life. There's leadership within friends. There's leadership in your service in your community. There's obviously the leadership that happens in the workplace, and leadership on a team, right? Like a sports team. I talk often with my son about leadership and how it's showing up on the soccer or football, whatever, wherever you're listening from, field, right? So that to me it needs to be defined much, much more broadly than just what happens in the workplace. Management is what happens in the workplace with leaders. And then I would say, in terms of leadership, it's about how you show up for others, or how you show up for the work. It is where your intentions are. It's how you model, and it is a level of being proactive versus reactive. So I look at it from a multiple different vantage points and facets.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting. So in a sense, it's because it's ubiquitous, this need for leadership in all aspects of our lives. Actually, I think the definition itself is narrower, even because of its breadth of application. That, as you said, it's how you show up, and it's your level of intention, and I guess it's your momentum, directionality around that. And you could sort of take leadership in your own life, because we know people who are too passive about what happens to them. And we often talk in situations that are less than ideal, that they're caused by a lack of leadership, where they persist through a lack of leadership because they're not getting resolved. And so that sort of forward momentum and intention is really what we mean, because even So you and I could be tasked with leading an organization out of a mess, for example, and we would choose different paths and go in different directions, maybe diametrically opposed, but we would both be exhibiting leadership because we show the intention and directionality of what we're trying to do. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. And I would say,
So
it's
I
about
get
vision.
the $1 million then.
You get the $1 million, but it's also about the vision, right? You just touched on it without saying it, right? A leader holds some level of vision, some level of like a North Star, grounded in deep values. They understand their values and how those will show up and manifest in the world that's around them.
And that shows, I think, another word that we don't hear a lot about anymore, it seems, is integrity. In the sense that if you are in touch with your values and that informs and defines your vision, you're unlikely to shift that vision willy-nilly. You're not going to show up at a management team or leadership team meeting and go, okay, forget what I said last week because now we're going to do it this way. Or you're not easily persuaded by someone that you sit next to on a long haul flight who suddenly changes your mind about everything, and you show, okay, guys, we're going to go and do it a different way. And we've experienced people who are in senior positions, we will call them leaders, it was small L, who can behave that way, and it's frustrating because they're not in touch with that. They don't have the integrity that gives continuity to their vision. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think it's the pendulum. And I think part of that also is around the confidence that they have within their decision-making, right? I think as a leader, you have to be confident and grounded enough. I'm okay if somebody shows up at a meeting 2 weeks after making a decision saying, I don't think I made the right decision, and I'm going to fall on my sword on this one. And I know how it's going to impact it, but you're naming it. You're not just showing up and saying, and I've made a different decision today, right? The wind, which way is it blowing, right?
Right.
No, we're not. I actually think integrity is much, much deeper in the sense that you know who you are and what you stand for, and you lead with that. And I know it's a word that isn't used so often, but I feel like I've been saying it a lot the last couple of weeks to a couple of clients and colleagues. I know somebody who's leaving a job because the work that she's being asked to do is going against her core values, her integrity, and they're having a parting of ways. So I think if we can be that grounded and stand firmly on that foundation, it helps to inform, again, how we show up, how we make decisions. Our visions don't change. Like we learn this. Typically, our visions don't change often, but they do evolve.
They do, yes, certainly.
Right. Our missions change. We know that from even nonprofit work, right? Our whole goal is to go out of business, right? I love talking about nonprofits. Like, let's go out of business, right? Like, let's set a goal and go out of business, or we have to change our mission. So, so that's my take on integrity.
Yeah. No, I think you're right in that integrity also informs how we recognize and respond to our mistakes. I think that's pretty critical. Okay, so I think we're clear that leadership is not about a job title or a position within an organization as such, but really about your level of intentionality, directionality, where you're trying to go and why, and that being in alignment with your values and who you are. Is that
beautiful? Done.
Okay,
Mic drop.
Excellent. Right now, next normal. This truly is $1 million question because as you know, I remember when I started this podcast in April of 2020, it was really just hitting hard, and here we are, more than a year later, and we're still just in some places coming out pretty stridently of lockdowns and COVID, and other places, returning or sort of, waiting for that turn of events, so it's highly variable, and people are, I think, sort of faced with a number of conundrums and questions about what the next normal is really going to look like.
I think it's important to acknowledge that in some countries, right, the next normal is beginning to happen and rapidly, and that in some countries they are in the thick of the COVID crisis. So I just, the spectrum is very, very wide.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody thought, I mean, look, in March 2020, I got off an international flight while, Europe was spiking. I returned to California, and it won't happen here. We'll figure it out. And then, school shut down, the city shut down, but just 3 weeks. Don't worry, people. It'll just be 3 weeks, right? And we made, I think, the word that has been used often is these major pivots within our work, within how within our rhythms. We've had a massive reset. Organizations have had resets. People have had resets. Family units, friend groups. It has been kind of the global reset. However you want to define that. And here we are a year plus later saying, wait, I just got used to this pivot, this shift, and now there's going to be another one, right? This next normal. And we're never going to return to what was on, January 1, 2020, right? That whatever life looked like then is not necessarily going to be the life that we're going to see whenever this next normal becomes the reality for people. And I think for some, we're moving towards that. And what does that look like? It looks like work, organizational culture, how we do business, what choices we're making for ourselves, for our families. So there's so many layers to it.
Yeah, I think from a nonprofit perspective, that is how we have to look at it in these sort of sections or dimensions. There's changes to the work that we're doing, the level of need, the types of need, the way we respond to the need. And then, of course, there are these internal differences about who our staff are, where they are, how we deploy our resources, how we connect with our donors and our partners. And it's interesting because the question that sort of lingered in my mind as I was thinking about our topic today is that most people who are asking themselves how I lead into the next normal have had to, for better or worse, lead through from the old normal to where we are now. And, it's sort of once bitten, twice shy. Or, some people, well, we've all had different experiences of going through it. And in terms of leading to the next normal, those have to come to bear, don't they, on how people approach it?
There's no question. In leading through, we've had to lead through, we've had to persevere, right? There's so many different pieces to what also entering this next normal is. I want to acknowledge, particularly in the nonprofit space, the people that I've been in touch with, my colleagues and clients are also hitting a burnout point. Everything has had to shift. Head down, let's get through it, let's address. What I've been encouraging people to do is wait, come up, get off the dance floor for a second, join me on the balcony and say, what have we learned over the last 15 months, 18 months, however long it'll be? What have you learned? What have you shifted? What's changed, right? And I think about nonprofits like as a three-legged stool, right? You've got programs and services, you've got fundraising, right, to ensure that those programs and services happen. And then you've got your infrastructure, which is your people, right, your staff, and kind of your internal infrastructure. And all three of those things are important, right? They have to be balanced. So if you look at each of these areas and say, what did we do? How did it help us? How did it hurt us? And what does that mean when we enter this next phase? So for example, there are some nonprofits who never completely locked down because they were doing client service work. They had to provide meals for those who are food insecure, right? but they may have had to do it with less volunteers or less dollars, right?
Or
Or more
logistically in a very
dollars.
different way in order to
Exactly.
manage infection. Yeah.
Right. Then you have organizations who went completely remote and didn't see each other for the last 15 plus months, right? And what did that do? Engaging with our donors. Nonprofits, many of them didn't have the gala, the big run walk, and those were
Right.
done, events were done virtually. We didn't have our lunches with our major donors, but we were able to connect with them over Zoom. What did that do for relationships? So every nonprofit, every organization will see what worked and what didn't work, and that has to help to inform what the next normal is going to look like.
Yeah, there is, and it's a great point because there's a lot of experience to rely on. Certain things stopped altogether. Certain things just went slower because they had to be done in a different way. Certain things went faster because, we didn't have to get together. We can do it remotely. And that works actually better in some cases. Some things were smaller. Some things were, they changed in nature. And so people have had actually quite a lot of experience of dramatic change in the last year that they have to leverage in looking forward.
Absolutely.
Do you think that people are less focused on certainty or expecting of their leaders and leaders of expecting of themselves less what's the right word? It could be confidence, I guess, about being right. In other words, are people a bit more relaxed about, well, we don't really know. We clearly can't see the future in the way that we could have expected or anticipated of ourselves in the past. So now we got to be a bit more relaxed about that.
I think it's a bit more relaxed, but intentional, right? I think that's been my mantra. Be intentional. Use some data, use some intuition to help us, but it's this notion of, I used this yesterday in a conversation. Pre-pandemic, when we were doing strategic plans, it was like, we want to do a strategic plan, but we want it to be like really our business plan as well, right? For the next 3 to 5 years, what is our business plan? And
Right.
now it's more like, wait, let's have a framework or a roadmap, which will have some guiding principles and some buckets that we want to work in. But it's very hard for us to sit down and build the true roadmap of what this is going to look like.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned strategic plans because that was a huge shift in the middle of 2020. Organizations decided, well, we can't continue with this process, or we're going to abandon it altogether, or suspend it because we now need to do scenario planning, and we're really looking at scenarios A, B, and C over the next 6, 9, 12 months, and that's as far as we can see, if that. Never mind the 3 to 5 year situation. Now we've cycled through those 6, 9, 12 months scenarios. We are better informed, but I'm not sure organizations are really looking to open up that 3 to 5 year window again anytime soon.
I would say 18 months right now, right? That's my comfort zone. And that I think is even really being generous, right?
Yeah.
I would say even focusing it in 6-month chunks is what's really important. Who knows? I do think we will be back at a point where we are going to project 3 to 5 years out. But I think what the pandemic has taught us is that things can change in a minute, in a millisecond.
Yeah. Yeah.
That will rock everybody's world. And I keep saying, we've all been in the same ocean, on the same water, just in different boats with different passengers over the last, 15 plus months. And, what passengers need to be on the boat and off the boat, what size boat are we going to be in for the next 6 months or the next year? I think right now, before we start planning and going too far into the future, again, it's that, what did we learn and how will that inform, I would say, the next year?
Yeah. So keeping the time horizon modest And I think,
and flexible and nimble.
And flexible. Yeah. Because, and I use the three-legged stool analogy a lot too. And, including the board members and partner organizations. And it's interesting is in amid uncertainty, when there are lots of options, different choices to make, you could see it's a recipe for lots of certainly debate, but also disagreement. And leaders often feel that they've got to take a very firm stand and create that consensus in order to get the alignment in the organization moving together. And this no matter what size organization you are. So are we in a situation now, because of these variable emergence from lockdown restrictions and opening things up again, but possibly with some risk of reverting back, and sort of up in the air? Are we in a situation where it's harder for leaders to create that alignment in their organizations?
This is the it depends answer, right? It depends on the organization. I'll tell you, in March, April, when things in 2020, now I have to preface it, in March, April 2020, because it's been that long. I was hearing a lot from kind of like executive director CEOs that either their board and or board chairs were really involved, and it became their, it became all consuming because it was a distraction from what was going on in maybe their own personal businesses or whatnot. Or the board and the board chairs totally checked out because they were consumed with what was going on within their personal businesses and personal business lives. And it created a lot of dissonance and discomfort. Some board chairs and boards were projecting their own fears for their own work onto the organization. Different industries, different, different mentalities, different leadership. So I think true colors began to come out in both positive and maybe some negative or challenging ways. And the board piece of all of this is, who has really stepped up to support the organization? How do we look at that? How do we see, what type of pipeline work do we need to do to support, building that leadership? And this is where the partnership between the CEO and the board chair or the executive committee, however, is going to be critical. Alignment there is going to be where it all starts. Or
falls apart. It's always the most important relationship in a nonprofit, isn't it?
Look, nonprofit work is all relational. That bottom line, you're in relationship with your board, you're in relationship with staff, you're in relationship with your clients, or the people that you serve, you're in relationship with your donors. It's all relational work. And I actually think that this last year proved that we had to do our relational work differently. But if you haven't been doing relational work with the board, you've had to amp that up over this period of time.
Yeah, and these questions that we're talking about now in terms of managing the changing environment in these dimensions and looking at which relationships are working and not, and so on, apply to all leadership styles. So the leadership style is not really, I don't want to say it's not a useful thing to be thinking about now, but it's sort of it's sort of beside the point. No matter what your leadership style, you still have to be thinking of a shorter time horizon and leveraging the experience of the last year in positive, negative. I mean, these things matter no matter what type of leader you are. Is that right? Or have I got that?
Yeah, there's a leadership style, right? Here's who I am, right? And you can take any framework or assessment, and you can do your Myers-Briggs, you can do your Strengths Finder, you can do your DISC, and you can do anything and know what your style is. And that helps to inform the people that you work with, board, staff, etc., how you might show up, especially how you might show up in stressful times, right? But that just is informative in terms of how we work together, how we might be able to communicate better. So that's one element of style. There's one adaptation, by the way, of leadership style, is that actually we have the ability to be in multiple styles. We just have a default, right? It's like I am right hand dominant, right? It would be like taking my pen and moving it to my left hand, learning how to write my name or sign my name, and saying, okay, like I can do it. Right? It's the spectrum, and I can operate within this spectrum. So, so style is also adaptive, right?
Yes, it evolves. Yes, it's a dynamic thing itself.
It's a dynamic thing. So it's there's like the practical that we need to get into right now. And I go back again to, I love that you brought it up, the integrity, the values, understanding what the vision and the mission of your organization is, and making sure that the work that you're doing, you have a bit of like a rubric that you can go through to say, like, are we being true to our mission? Are we able to accomplish this?
Yeah,
so
it's
style and the way it gets applied.
Yeah, it's not actually that. I mean, it's what I'm thinking is that an executive director listening to this will be thinking, oh, how do I lead into the next normal? Do I need to adopt a different style, or what's the response for my style? We can do a little quiz and go, here's my style, therefore do this. And it's not really a plug and play like that. And I love what you say about returning with integrity to the mission and values, because it's almost like saying, don't overthink it. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. Just go back to the core basics of why we're here and what we're trying to do, and look at it, closer to home if necessary. Only go 6 months out. What is it you need to do to meet those objectives in the next 6 months? And stop worrying about all these other things that can prove to be distractions.
Yeah, and here's the other piece. I'm going to bring my friend Simon Sinek into the mix, because I love the framework of the why, right?
Yeah.
Why is our mission, or actually I would say is more of our vision. Why do we do what we do? The how is our mission, right? So if you know Simon, he says you start with the why, you go to the how and the what. Yep. The what may change for our organizations. It may have already changed. It may change as we move into the next normal. But we got to remember why we do what we do, and how we do it might shift, might get tweaked a little bit. Mm-hmm. And we got to look at it through all of, again, the lenses. Our programs and services might remain totally the same, or maybe perfect example, an organization that actually offers professional development. I train for them. Professional development for nonprofit managers, leaders, etc. Completely went from an in-person classroom training model to virtual, right?
Totally virtual. Yep.
And they have this beautiful classroom space that hasn't been touched in all of these months. And they're thinking about reopening. But they've had more participation from people on virtual, because you're not out of the office for 4 hours, driving there, doing it, coming back. They're able to log in from their desk. They do the 2-hour training and they're done for the day. Yeah. And they can go back to work. So I've been talking to them. So what does it look like? Maybe you do some in-person to build community in that way. Maybe you do more intensives in person, and you do more you do more of these one-offs in a virtual manner. What does that look like? Time of day. So these are all things that we can say, look at what we learned and how do we shift and tweak how it then gets presented in this next normal.
Yeah. So quite a little shift here. Do you think the what we've covered, the ground we've covered, is different if your organization has transformed beyond recognition. So, for example, it's doubled in size because of the need that you serve, or it's halved, or it's a fraction of its former self, or even merged with another organization, or been swallowed up or swallowed up others, in terms of some consolidation locally. And so you got different dynamics and different people. Maybe there's been a dramatic shift in the board membership. Now these are things that leaders might expect to anticipate over the course of a career that have been condensed into this period of rapid change anyway. I mean, as a response or as a part and parcel of that change. How is what we're saying different for leaders that find themselves in those circumstances?
I don't think it's that terribly different, because we still need to ask ourselves, why do we do what we do? How do we do it? And what do we do? And we still need to know, we as a leader, what our values are, what is our integrity, what is our gauge. Now, I actually believe, and I don't have a crystal ball, that the tail of COVID-19 and the last year plus is going to have a very long tail in the nonprofit space. We saw that in 2008 with the recession here in the United States. We saw that after 9/11 as well here in the United States. I don't know the trends globally, but typically they're in close alignment. So we know that the nonprofit world gets impacted longer. So I'll give an example. Organizations have been doing a lot of social service work, human needs work during this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also saw a large increase in donations during this time to scale up services. But we don't know in a year if those dollars are going to be the same. So do you change your infrastructure as a result of that? You're probably not going to do that just yet. Right? You're going to find creative ways to scale. Now, organizations who found themselves in the opposite, where funding has been hard over this last year, the question becomes, well, how do I re-engage with donors who haven't given? Why isn't this cause resonating with people? Are there new earned revenue models that we should be looking at? Or is it time to pivot again for the organization? So I think we can begin to ask those questions during this time. But again, we're talking about that narrow horizon. We know mergers and acquisitions have started in the nonprofit field and will likely continue. And we also know that there are so many nonprofits, right, doing a lot of similar things. So, where does partnership and collaboration come into play as well? So again, I don't think it changes fully how we lead. It's just the questions we need to be asking ourselves. And again, it's going up into that balcony and not just head down, pushing through.
Yeah, and I think so. I like this idea of the balcony and looking at taking the big picture, but also not addressing questions that are too big or too far in future because we just can't see. So it's understanding what that true horizon line is. So you don't want to focus just on the small immediate questions. You have to look a bit further. You got to do some visioning and some understanding what that actually is, but not so far that it becomes a total guesswork and speculation, and then it's not really value to anyone. So it's managing that.
Look, we need to, especially as things begin to open up, and depending on the model, right, and the service that our organizations are providing, there's a lot of internal work we're going to have to do with our staff, right? That's the piece that I keep coming back to, is we've probably done a pretty good job at stewarding our donors during this time, serving our clients to stay relevant during this time. But what's going on internally? How's the staff doing? Organizations that have been able to operate with everybody working from home, what does that look like when you're telling people come back to work after you've they've been at home for 15 months. Why do
Yeah.
they come back to an office? What is the
Right.
purpose of being back in an office? Is there comfort with letting people work remotely? Are we now saying it's quality of work and working towards deliverables and outcomes, and saying, you know what, 9 to 5 is no longer the way we're operating?
Or even locally. I mean, at the end of the day, I know, if I'll just take one standard position, which I know not many nonprofits struggle to fill, is it's like a chief financial officer, for example, or vice manager. It's constant, and development directors too. Short lifespan in any organizations. There's a lot of churn in those roles. In I guess just about any metropolitan area, thing across North America. But why, do you need to have somebody who is even in your time zone necessarily, if they understand the work and the rules? Now, there might be some state certifications you need in some cases, so there's some geographic limitations, but they're not like not like commutable distance considerations.
The thing that I keep thinking about is our human capital pool, our talent pool for filling jobs has expanded greatly if you're okay with people being remote, which is going to make the job market a little bit more challenging, right? For people trying to seek out jobs. But now organizations can hire talent that might not be willing to, live in that city, but be able to provide their skills, talents, knowledge to the organization. This is where I'll tell you one pain point lives sometimes between the board and the CEO. One entity might say, no, you need to have a staff who's showing up to an office every day, right? We have people that we need to serve. And one might say, I don't think so. We can do it differently. And then, it also begs the question to people who have to show up, who have to be there to unlock that door, and the people who don't. And how do you build a culture, an organizational culture that is adaptive, it is flexible, is accommodating, and that's going to be the hardest piece in some cases. I don't know. No crystal ball.
It is difficult because you can't have. It's a bit like the way schools have struggled when they've had the hybrid models of trying to teach kids who are right there in the classroom with you, as well as kids who are following online. It's two different modes. It's been really, really challenging, and some obviously education professionals would say impossible to do both well. You're sort of doing both, suboptimally. And we do need to think about how we're supporting staff and the culture of an organization if we've got some staff who are only there virtually and therefore have no physical proximal contact with people that they work with, versus those who do. And you end up with there's no other word but hybrid culture.
I think the question that I would be asking is, what is the purpose of bringing staff or bringing people into a workplace for your organization? That's question number one. And depending on how you answer that, there's a number of different factors, right? We carry these huge overhead costs to keep the lights on in a building, right? Maybe we're downsizing.
But they have to be no more than 10% of donations.
Right. But maybe this is a way to reduce overhead costs a little bit for an organization, and maybe we're doing
shift those to salaries.
That would be a gift, right, for our nonprofit pros. But maybe what we're doing is Team Tuesdays, right? And Team Tuesdays means that everybody's coming into the office and all we're doing is teamwork on Tuesdays, right? And collaboration, and then the head down work, the computer-based work happens at home, right? So I think we have to start asking questions. We kind of have to be our own sleuths or our own detectives, right? We have to think more in questions and not in this is how it's going to be, because again, we don't know.
So I think that the sort of two themes that I'm getting out of this conversation, which I've really, really enjoyed, is flexibility on the one hand, in terms of how far in the distance we're looking, in terms of how we're managing relationships, how we're managing all aspects of running our nonprofit, from donor management, board management, program management, staff, and so on, and how we're looking at our resources, partnerships, and so on. But at the same time, why don't we adopt this word? Why don't we use it? Integrity, which we mean alignment with our core missions, our why, both personally as leaders, but corporately for the organization as well, and tie those two together. So have some flexibility about how you, about the how and the what, as long as you're consistent with that why.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then it has to tie to everything, all of those components that you touched on. And I do believe that there are going to be creative solutions. This is, where sometimes we learn and grow when there's discomfort.
Well, we have to learn and grow discomfort, right? And in some cases, learning and growing is not always, fun and full of joy. We're sometimes forced to do that. And I think the other element of leadership, now hearing myself say this, flexibility, integrity, is we also have to give ourselves permission to not have to do it all at once. It is piecemeal. It's, one step at a time. I'd rather see people do this. What I advise my clients always is do one thing really well. Just do that one well. And then, and model what doing well looks like, and then move on to the next. You'll always have another problem. There's always, the work never goes away,
It is also giving yourself permission not to have all the answers right away. Right. And then not having to do all the work. We can't do it all at once. We use the phrase multitasking. Oh, I'm multitasking. We're never actually multitasking, right? I'm not, multitasking. Right. I'm doing one thing, but not well.
Right. I'm doing one thing while thinking about all the other things I could be doing.
It's just right. It's just the reality. So it's giving yourself the permission to say, I'm human. I'm taking it one step at a time. I'm going to lead through, you said it so beautifully, integrity with my values. I'm going to be really clear, and we as a team, as an organizational team, and I mean that broadly, donors, staff, board,
volunteers,
what is our why? Continue to be grounded in our purpose. And then, you take it one step at a time. And I would say where the board can be really supportive of the CEO is to say, what are our priorities? Rank them and start at the top. What are the first two most important priorities that you need to tackle? Is it people coming back to work and, fundraising? Great. Just focus on that and do that really, really well. Again, it's quality over quantity, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's. I think really the element of leadership is framing the discussion, the way you ask these questions, the way you allow them to be answered, which itself, of course, shows some flexibility, but having some structure around that, again, which is shows intent and forward momentum, but not necessarily having all the answers. We're all human. It's still an ultra marathon. It's going to take a long time, but we don't stop and sit around being complacent because it's going to take a long time. We still have to keep taking one step at a time.
Yeah. And you just, to tie this beautifully back to the beginning around leadership, right? The leader is the one who asks the questions, who sets a tone, who's, I used this phrase earlier, who could fall on their sword and say, made a wrong decision, right? We need our nonprofit leaders to show up and be real and ask the questions, provide the guidance, and create space for voices, for all the voices.
I think that's important too, right? So and part of that is leaders not expecting themselves to have the answers, as you said. So they want to hear those voices. So it's really, it came down to it, with that flexibility, integrity around setting and managing the agenda, how we ask the questions, how we find the answers, and how we arrive at some decisions about the step by step that we're taking.
Exactly.
No, that
Exactly.
sounds good. All right.
All right.
Well,
Easy.
that was fun. Yeah, right. Okay. So the $1 million checks go to. Anyway, that was lovely and wonderful. Thank you so much. I
Kev,
feel
I'm
like
so
I've really
happy.
learned something. It was a really, really good run through some lots of things have been flying around in my head. I'm sure millions of others. So thank you for helping bring some clarity to it.
Well, thanks for having me. And, all of this is unknown, right? We're just here having a conversation about what we think, and it could all be very different in 6 months from now. And we just got to keep reading, learning, asking those questions, and being in conversation like this.
Yeah, and as you said, nonprofits are all about relationships. So continuing those relationships in an open, positive way goes a long way
Absolutely.
to making progress.
I agree.
Okay, so let's remind everyone where they can find you online and about
Sure.
your webinar on the 15th. I remember you saying
Absolutely. Good memory. So you can find me
it
on
was within the last
Instagram.
hour, so I'm okay.
You're good. Find me on Instagram, Heather_Wolfson. You can also find me online, www.mavencoachingandconsulting.com. I do have a free webinar on June 15th. I'm calling it Here I Am, the reset and recharge for summer and the next normal. We're kind of going to look within ourselves, set some goals so that we are mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually preparing for what's to come.
That's excellent. And if people want to contact you directly, they connect with you on Instagram and work through the DMs. Is that the most effective way?
That's great. Or you can find my email also on my website. And it's me. You get me either way.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks for joining me. This was episode 38 of the Nonprofit Problem Solver podcast, and we are live on Yacht Me every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, and so we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. So that should have ended it. I think I did. Maybe not.